Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. On behalf of the Muslim Legal Fund, which is a nonprofit organization fighting for national security reform, upholding and establishing justice in our courtrooms and communities for Muslims in America, I would like to welcome all of you for joining us today, and thank you again for spending this next few minutes with us. It is my honor to introduce our team member, Basel Alhasan, who is a highly experienced attorney with a strong background in corporate law and legal research. He's a graduate of University of Virginia School of Law and a member of the Texas Bar. And today, Basel serves as our staff attorney in the Civil Litigation Department. So please join me in welcoming Basel for today's town hall.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the introduction for that. Appreciate everyone taking the time to spend their Friday afternoon with us here, learning a little bit about the effects of social media and the law and just general guidelines. So generally how I like to do these things is I just do a general presentation, kind of run through it, and then I like to open it up for questions just because I find that different things are happening in the community at different times. People have different concerns, and oftentimes, as is what's happening now, what's present is what people are going to have more questions on. So please save your questions for the end, but we'll definitely be able to get to them. So, as Bilal said, I am a staff attorney in the Civil Litigation Department, and today we're going to be going over social media and litigation, primarily on the civil side. Next slide, please. Just some general background. I think everyone has an understanding of what the First Amendment is, but we'll dive a little bit deeper. On its face, the actual law is, from the Constitution, is that the Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people to freely or peaceably assemble. So that includes things like free speech, free press, and many of the demonstrations and peaceful protests that we're seeing currently. The 14th Amendment is also falls into this category of free speech, where no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States. Now, what does that actually mean? Next slide, please. So the main distinction I believe that people should take away from today is understanding that freedom of speech is freedom from the government. And even that is limited in some regards. And one of the main things you want to understand when you're trying to get a better understanding of speech in general is who the actors are, whether it's demonstrators against people who might retaliate, such as the government actors, or private actors. So the Constitution protects free speech, like I said, from government actors, but not private parties. And that could include things like your employer. The Constitution does not protect free speech from backlash or criticism. And these are kind of just examples that I think happened in the early stages of the Palestine-Israel conflict around October. I think the one that got the most traction was the one in New York for I believe she was an NYU student that had her law offer revoked. And then a small note: some states do have some protections against this, but generally it's not applicable. So if it's a private actor, we'll get into it a little bit later in the slides, but it's what they call at-will employment. Next slide, please. What speech is not protected? This is including from government actors. So incitement to imminent and lawless action, any kind of solicitation to commit crimes, truth threats, obscenity. That one's a little bit obscure because that one's kind of an eye of the beholder, but we can get into some of that later on. Fighting words. There's a difference between fiery actions and direct threats. That kind of falls in the true threats, fighting words actions, where a statement in conjunction with an action can be seen as fighting words. But again, you always want to generally use your best judgment. Defamation, things that are slanderous or libel. But this generally applies to more, this wouldn't apply to like your general everyday citizen, unless it's something very egregious or said in a big publication, because lying is not necessarily unprotected speech either. And then child pornography, that kind of goes into the same categories: obscenity, perjury, blackmail, things of that nature. That's speech that is not protected. Next slide, please. Controversial speech, like I alluded to earlier, is protected speech. So controversial speech can include a number of different things. It can be advanced causes and beliefs. It could be statements criticizing public policies and implementation, even if unpopular. I know one of the big famous cases was the people protesting, or what they took as protesting was like Colin Kaepernick taking the knee, expressing, they thought it was an expression of an opinion negatively about the nation's flag. And these were defined in contemptuous. But again, even unpopular speech is protected. Even disagreeable ideas, incorrect ideas, like I alluded to earlier, people that just might necessarily not align, or speech that is just generally not palatable, but is just very, very disagreeable from a lot of people, is still protected speech. Next slide, please. So free speech versus inciting a riot. This can be a number of different things. And below, I kind of laid out some examples. I use Trump because I think he's his rallies are a good example of all three things, of where it's okay for assembly, not okay, some of the incitement of riots, and then the definite most famous one of January 6th, or some of his language and from his rally where they marched on to storm the Capitol. But the government may prohibit certain speech, especially if there's an advocation of the use of force, or to commit a crime, or the speech is directed for, again, imminent lawless action, or is just generally going to produce undesirable results. So him kind of just giving a general speech where he's rallying up the crowd, even though a lot of people find it contemptuous or unsavory, that's fine. Him saying we should march and fight, the courts are still kind of debating some of this. Some people definitely say that his crowd and his supporters took those words to mean we should storm the Capitol, and then that's where that line gets crossed. Laws were broken, and then kind of just got progressively kept pushing that line of what is speech, what is inciting a riot. Next slide, please. At-will employment. At-will employment means you can be let go for any reason if you're an at-will employee. If you didn't sign a contract, you're likely an at-will employer, or you're an at-will employee. Some examples that I have here was on the right, we have an executive that boarded a flight to Africa. She tweeted out, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS." And then, "Just kidding, I'm white." Unsavory speech. Obviously, the company she was working for did not want to be represented by someone like that, especially an executive. And she was fired before she even landed. Another example that made some headlines a while back was a daycare employee was fired for her Facebook posts, saying she hates being around kids. Someone reported her employer did not take kindly to that, and she was let go immediately. You can be fired for any reason if you're an at-will employee, as long as it's not an illegal reason, such as a discriminatory reason if you're a protected class or things of that nature. But yeah, you just want to generally be aware of what you're posting and some of the implications and consequences that come around that. Doesn't have to be necessarily you're posting something illegal to lose your job. It's, I think, generally advisable. I think lots of people have heard this advice, but I always like to reiterate it. Lots of employers like to check social media before they hire anybody. Big companies have whole HR teams that are just dedicated to this kind of thing, where they're just looking at people's background. Anything that's unsavory, anything that might hurt their brand, anything where they're just generally trying to avoid any kind of headaches. I think one of my favorite lawyer jokes is, I always see it on like these little memes and stuff, but it says, dance like no one is watching, and email and post as if you're going to be asked about it in a deposition or an interview. You just always kind of want to be prepared, especially in the age of the internet. I think some people think that it's the internet, what's going to happen, but it's on the internet, it's there forever. Next slide, please. Discovery and litigation. This is actually one of my strong suits and one of the things I do a lot of. Social media is one of the first places attorneys just go to check for any kind of things. If any kind of lawsuit is brought up, I know even in the criminal context, oftentimes they'll use certain criminal acts in conjunction with your social media. In civil, it's just a part of the evidence and discovery. We're just generally going through everything. Any kind of post you have that might be relevant, anything you might have said, depending on what the case is. So you just want to be, again, generally careful on what you post on social media. Here, one of the examples I have on the right is social media post leads court to wipe out $150 million verdict. And that was from the attorney himself. They were just, not careful and got caught up for it. So you want to be careful with what you post. Even attorneys who know better still make this mistake. Next slide, please. This one's kind of an interesting concept. So I think a lot of people now are asking kind of, is social media considered a public forum? And the answer is not yes, and it's not no. It's honestly kinda. So the government can put restrictions on speech for time, place, and manner. Time, place, and manner means like where speech is generally accepted, like a public forum. I think right now it's like very popular, like on these university campuses. There's generally a lot of protests, not just with Israel, Palestine, but with other things that are usually going on college campuses, especially if they're public universities. So generally, any kind of place where free speech and protests have happened in the past is still allowed to be happening today. We'll get a little bit deeper in that in a little bit. So why is social media considered a public forum? So some people would argue, so certain politicians, when they make their Twitter accounts and their Facebook accounts based on their campaigns and stuff, courts will say those are public forums, even though they're on a private company's website and they're on private accounts, and technically those private companies are the ones that own these accounts. A judge, I think, even came down on Trump here on this example, where he said he couldn't block critics from his Twitter account because, in a way, it is a public forum where people are engaging with him as a public servant. At the same time, after Trump posted some things, and I think he's since been reinstated, but he hasn't gotten back on, Twitter at the time decided to ban him. I believe it was after January 6th, after the riots and the storming of the Capitol. But they had that right. They're a private company. So that kind of goes back to what I said, where the answer is kind of not yes, it's not no, it's a kind of. That does not mean that public officials and legislators and stuff can't have their own private individual social media accounts. It's just if they use it for their campaign or in the any kind of way in their, for what their kind of job description is as a public figure, a public servant, that counts as a public forum. Also, outside of the political context, earlier as I was speaking about social media in general and kind of what attorneys do, if it's on the internet and it's findable by anybody, courts generally consider that to be public, which does not make the analysis any clearer. So there's no automatic entitlement to use of these private platforms. Like I said earlier, if it's found on the internet, the law says that it's in the public. It's like finding something in a park or hearing something, while you're walking out, going to get a slice of pizza. Next slide, please. What is considered a non-public forum? So this is where government can regulate some speech. So what is considered a non-public forum? So privately owned property, you can't just go into a store and just start yelling stuff. It's not public, it's privately owned. If they don't like your speech, they have every right to kick you out. Even some publicly owned property can be regulated if it is exclusively, or the purpose of that public property is exclusively used for anything other than individual expression. So some of the examples that we've seen in the past, things like airports, you're not going to see protests there, jailhouses, military bases, even though they're publicly owned and owned by the government, and private residences. And then kind of what earlier to our discussion, private social media pages are also not considered public forums, especially if they're not one from like a public servant or things of that nature. And the government has every right to regulate and impose restrictions on this speech if it's reasonably related to whatever that public forum's function is, including restrictions that discriminate against particular viewpoints. As long as they're discriminating against all viewpoints equally, you can't be allowing some speech but not other speech. So I think one of the good examples I like to use is you're likely allowed to protest outside of a public library. You're not going to be allowed to protest inside the public library if you're loud on a megaphone, things of that nature. Doesn't matter what your viewpoint is. Doesn't matter if it's something that's popular or something that people agree with. It's just the rules of the library. You got to be quiet. Next slide, please. Oh, this is fun. Here are some examples that our civil team has found in discovery. Here we're trying to prove that a plaintiff had bias to bring a lawsuit against one of our clients in a $156 million judgment. One of our attorneys found that she had 4 different Facebook pages that she lied about in a deposition. And in those Facebook pages, there was a treasure trove of things that we used to show her bias. One of these things here shows that Palestinians and Arabs were on lockdown. And she says, this is great. She hopes it spreads all over Israel. They have to get their hands dirty and not just drink coffee. And she hopes that she wants them to all go rot and go to Syria because Arabs have it too good in Palestine and Israel. One of our other posts had a story that was incendiary at best, that was about a terrorist attack that had a headline to kind of draw general tropes and discrimination against Arabs and Muslims. But it says here the victim was killed in an Allahu Akbar stabbing. And on top of this post that she reposted, she says, we need to stop the nonsense. They want to rid the world of Western culture and kill us. They are not with mental issues as she sees it, and all Arabs want to kill them, and condolences to the girl that died. This is one of the first things that she was asked about in a deposition under oath, and I believe we have some next examples on the other slide as well. Next slide, please. There we go. This one's my favorite. Trump is no different than the rest. We should talk less and do more. Arab lovers, they will pay. The honeymoon is over. And then she here posts a racist meme. She goes, it goes from bad from worse. What is happening is so scary. God help us, please. And it shows a white family dealing with, I believe, a hurricane, trying to escape and evacuate. And then it has their favorite person to hate on, Barack Obama. Says was freeing these people, and it's just a caricature of a bunch of mugshots from distinctly Arab-looking men with beards, and the general trope of racism against Arabs and Islamophobia and people from the Middle East in general. Again, all of these were brought up as exhibits, and she was asked about them under oath. She couldn't escape it. And this was proved, and this was one of the main things we used to try to prove her bias in a $156 million judgment. Or lawsuit, not judgment, my apologies. Next slide, please. My general advice to everyone: the internet is undefeated. You are not greater than it. If it is on the internet, it is on the internet forever, even if you delete it. One of my favorite tools to use, and me and the other attorneys, is something called the Wayback Machine. It's an archive of lots of different websites where we can kind of just go and pick any time and place. If it's been on the internet, it's likely been archived at some point, and nerds like me are looking for it as a job. And so you just want to be careful with what you post. Understand that you're not the exception. And even if you're not posting something that is distinctly controversial, if it's something that you don't want to talk about with your employer that likely could be found by an employer, just generally think before you post. My general advice is be who you can afford to be, especially now with all the protests and a lot of the pro-Palestinian content that's being posted, just because it's very divisive. I don't want to discourage anyone from posting or from protesting how they see fit. Just understand the consequences that come with it and what's likely to come from that. Even if the speech is protected, the consequences of that speech is equally protected. So if your employer doesn't like it, again, that goes back to our at-will employee discussion. You can be let go for any reason, as long as it's not a discriminatory reason or a protected reason or any kind of illegal reason. In recent news from this week, one of the examples I put in was, I'm sure some of the people saw at Arizona State University, a professor in political theory, Dr. Jonathan Udelman. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He accosted and he accosted and assaulted a Muslim woman who was just trying to get away. And he kind of just kept following her and bumping into her and kind of getting in her face based on a lot of what's happening in the news. The president of ASU came out, I believe, yesterday or earlier this morning. He said that Dr. Udelman is no longer permitted to be on campus and will never teach there again. So be aware of what goes on social media, even if you're not the one posting it as well. That's also general advice. Just golden rule, be a good person. If you don't want to have to talk about it later in a deposition or an interview, don't do it. Just good general advice. And next slide, please. That's pretty much it for my presentation on civil litigation, social media. This is our civil team, starting with our department head, Christina Jump, our senior staff attorney, Chelsea Glover, our other staff attorney, Samira Hosri, me, Basel Alhasan, our other staff attorney, Janan Shahade, and our wonderful paralegal, Rana Hakim. So right now, we're just going to open it up to questions, so please go ahead and submit it if you have any. It looks like the first one's already in. Are phrases like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" considered protected speech? That's a great question. Yeah, it technically is. I know Congress passed a bill trying to change the definition of certain phrases. I know, like on anti-Semitism, any kind of criticism of Israel or Zionism was now going to be considered anti-Semitic. I'm not 100% sure if that bill got passed yet. I know it was being discussed. I know it passed the House and the Senate, but I don't know if it got signed into law. Technically speaking, it's controversial speech for some people, but it is protected speech. But again, some people view it as a negative. Some people view it as hate speech. And if your employer is one of those people, it's something you want to take into account. What would constitute a true threat when commenting on a post on social media? Ooh, that one's a tricky one. So I think context matters in everything. I think if there's some kind of action verb that's associated with it, like some that I've seen in the past are kind of like, I think where that line gets distinct is not something that I would endorse, or that MLFA would endorse, but I think I've seen posts online that will say like, Biden and his cabinet deserve a beating, not my vote. Not technically a true threat, but if you said, hey, if I see Biden, or like I'm on my way to go see Biden to like teach him a lesson, that would, I think, be considered a true threat, and you'd probably get a knock on the door from Secret Service or the FBI. But to each their own on that. I would say use your best discretion and obviously use your best judgment, and that if you're already teetering on the line, or if you're having to ask questions, you're likely probably not something you should post. Does posting on private areas like WhatsApp or a private social media group still put me at risk? Absolutely it does. Depending on who's in that group chat, you're just increasing the likelihood of people to see it. If someone screenshots it, uploads it on the internet, now it's public. If it's something you don't want to be seen, it would definitely increase your risk, depending on if it's illegal conduct or if you're just worried about your employer or somebody seeing it. But yeah, it just depends on how large the group is. I've heard stories of some of these WhatsApp groups with 100 plus people, 200 plus people, where stuff gets posted. Things are constantly getting screenshotted and reposted. on different social media pages and stuff, depending on what kind of groups, what it is. So for me personally, I'm in a handful of like local attorney groups. There's lots of things being posted all the time. And I know they're getting reshared in other groups on other social media pages with other attorneys and stuff, just depending on what's happening. So you just want to be aware of all the consequences, and you want to kind of generally think of all the angles that go along with it.
Basel, thank you so much. I actually learned a lot, and I think your advice around being very strategic and being able to consider all the angles on whatever content I post today, how will it impact me tomorrow and in the near future? As you said, if something is on the internet, then it remains on the internet. And if one can find it, then many can find it. And that's something that we need to be strategic about and to be able to consider as we share our thoughts and ideas. So thank you so much for your insights, for your wisdom, for your guidance. I really appreciate you taking the time on this Friday to be able to educate all of us on this. And for everybody that's attending, thank you so much for joining us today. MLFA is we are a legal defense fund that is there to help you should you find yourselves in any sort of situation where you need legal advice. Please join us again on Monday. And on Monday, the topic is legal traps regarding protesting. So strange and unusual laws to watch out for. And as always, the Muslim Legal Fund is a nonprofit service. So we rely on your donations, on your support, and on your generosity. So please continue to donate, and please continue to empower us to continue to share advice, to share guidance, and to support our brothers and sisters during this difficult time. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Thank you guys for giving me your time.